It's the Lady versus the Lords now on BBC Two in a bid to eradicate an 800-year-old right. Blair's 1,000 Days.
Margaret Jay was given a historic task by Tony Blair to abolish the rights of hereditary peers. She was up against hundreds of Tory lords, most of them hereditary.
It is my belief that the most thoughtful among the hereditary peers of all political persuasions know that the time has come to say thank you and goodbye.
People say there's no Tory opposition anymore. Well, there is. It's alive and well and unelected and in the House of Lords with a 3-to-1 majority over us. Not a vote to their name, but able to vote down the plans that the people voted for in our manifesto. I call that arrogance.
Tony Blair had appointed Margaret Jay as Labour's first woman leader of the Lords. She shared his view of the hereditaries.
The fact of the matter is that it's their collective presence which is unacceptable, the fact that they are there because they inherited their seats as a birthright in a modern democracy.
New Labour had come to power promising to abolish hereditary peers. But Lady Jay knew that for 100 years governments had come to grief on the issue, and the inside story of what happened this time vividly illustrates the difficulty of turning election rhetoric into reality. The Lord Chancellor Derry Irvine was one of the high-powered team of ministers and civil servants helping Jay with the abolition bill.
I really don't see why Derry should have on 2 separate days to go over the same old ground.
Yeah.
What do you think, Charlie?
Well, I mean, I agree with Gareth. We are, to some extent, in the hands of the Tories and other opponents of the bill because they will just talk and talk and talk and talk.
I do think that our tone, although I'm sure expressed with our usual elegant warmth, is slightly changed. It's up to you, Lord Chancellor.
Terrible.
To be terrible. Irvine the terrible. Irvine the terrible again. Charmingly terrible.
We slug it out.
Against Jay and her team are the Conservative Lords, a mixture of appointed life peers and the hereditaries. They outnumber the Labour peers by nearly 3-to-1.
There are some spaces in the front here for those who can lie and kneel.
For their team photo, the Tories have even brought in a hereditary photographer.
Everyone ready? Ready?
Lord Strathclyde and Lord Cranborne, the last 2 leaders of the Tory peers, are both hereditaries. They think they know why Tony Blair wants to end the rights of hereditary peers to sit and vote in the Lords.
This is not about balance, this is about control. This is about power, this is about crushing dissent. What has the House of Lords done over the last 2 years? In fact, what has it done over the last 20 years is to provide dissent against the government of the day. That is a great role. We should relish that role. It is about to be done away with.
This has been going on since 1911, and of course, I mean, it's interesting that people say to you, well, of course it would have been different if they had handled it differently. I mean, the position has obviously changed, because at the 97 election, the Conservative Party's position was that they supported the hereditary peers all the way through last year. Their opposition has been about how they obviously think it's probably very sensible, but they just don't like the way it's being done. But the answer to that is they've had 45 years in government since 1911 to do it their way if they wanted to. They never did, and they didn't because it involved losing their Conservative majority in the upper house. So the real change is a massive political one.
The battle to abolish the hereditaries would claim many casualties, including 2 party leaders in the Lords. The man Tony Blair appointed to lead the Lords when he won power 1,000 days ago was Lord Richard, a former European Commissioner and self-proclaimed old Labour figure. He was up against the Tory leader Lord Cranborne and his chief whip Lord Strathclyde. Cranborne is a scion of the House of Cecil, whose family had been involved in statecraft and high intrigue for 400 years. Now Cranbourne had a cunning plan to force Lord Richard to negotiate.
My Lords, good morning.
I don't think it's proper for the House of Lords to disrupt the legislative programme of a popular, recently elected government. But what is on is to kid the government into thinking that we would. And in order to do that, what I want to do is to pick very carefully the issues on which we defeat them and to ratchet up the number of defeats and the importance of the defeats to make them believe that that is our intention and that it's going to completely destroy their legislative programme.
Lord Richard says that he'd been given instructions by Tony Blair to, quote, flush out the Tories and find out if there could be a bipartisan approach to abolishing the hereditaries. Who initiated the contacts with Lord Cranbourne?
Well, we knew they wanted to talk.
How did you know that?
Oh, well, various sort of subterranean channels told us that, the Tories really want to talk.
Lord Cranbourne's home in Chelsea was deemed to be a suitably safe house for the two leaders and their chief whips to meet for lunch.
I've quite rightly thought that our initial contacts ought to be made rather discreetly. My house is reasonably discreet, and it seemed to be a convenient venue which he was happy to come to, and we had a very agreeable time.
Very agreeable, as far as I remember. I don't remember what the food was, but it was very pleasant, and I think if it had been left to, the four of us there, we could probably have produced a package.
But it was not to be. In July 1998, Tony Blair sacked Lord Richard and promoted his deputy, Lady Jay, to replace him.
Anyway, I'm very sorry to...
They shafted Ivor, and the reason he was shafted is clear. He was sacked because he genuinely wanted an effective reformed second chamber. He and I agree about that.
I just don't know who I lost my job.
You don't know?
No, not at all.
You must have some idea.
No, well, I got about 4 different ideas, all of which seem to come together, but I mean...
What are they?
Well, I'm more old Labour than new Labour. That's certainly true. My views on the Lords are perhaps more radical than some other members of the government. I think that... I've forgotten who said it now, but I think Ken Livingstone said it, actually, just after I was sacked. He said, well, it's very, very simple when Ivor was sacked. Margaret Jay looks better in a short skirt.
The new leader's least favoured outfit are her peer's robes, which she calls her red dressing gown. Unlike those born to the ermine, she's not attracted by what she sees as the old-fashioned flummery of the Lords. The daughter of a former Labour Prime Minister, Lord Callaghan, her new role is a far cry from her earlier careers as a TV producer and running an AIDS trust.
A bill will be introduced to remove the right of hereditary peers to sit and vote in the House of Lords. It will be the first stage in a process of reform to make the House of Lords more democratic and representative.
It was Lady Jay's job to pilot the abolition bill through Parliament and into law.
Well, my initial attitude was that this was a substantial stroke of genius by Tony Blair, that Margaret Jay would bring a certain amount of her femininity to bear upon the backbenches of all parties.
You know the nickname that the hereditary peers have for you?
I can't remember with many of them, but tell me which one.
Posh Spice.
Oh yes, well it's either that or Scary Spice.
Or Scary Spice.
Yes, there's a close run thing between the two.
It would really spoil my life if Lady Jay ceased to be Lady Jay. She has grandeur, she has aristocracy. She looks every bit a peeress in the mode of an 18th century duchess.
Actually, to be serious, it's one of the most unattractive parts of the way they behave, is their extraordinary anachronistic attitude towards women.
And I hope I'm not going to be seduced by the noble Lady Jay as well, because I think I might give a certain amount of stick for that.
As you know, then on the Tory side, the hereditary peers refer to the life peers as day boys, and if you think they've got to also think about day girls, you can imagine their attitude.
I thought that she would be rather a good leader of the House. She had a very good, rather Olympian manner, but nice manner, and people found her elegant and persuasive, and she had authority. She was, of course, de facto also a hereditary peer, which made a number of us rather sympathetic to her.
To the extent that you inherit certain traits, I've no doubt that I inherited my political interest from my parents. It would be daft to pretend otherwise.
But your father obviously was a very skilled political operator in terms of getting things, legislation through. Do you think you have learnt some tactics from him?
Well, I've talked to him about the tactics, but frankly, I mean, he's too wise to get involved in contemporary battles.
I support this bill because it does not handle too much at one time.
Lord Callaghan backed his daughter's tactic of introducing a short bill to abolish the hereditaries while leaving the second stage until later because of what had happened to him in the Commons over Lord's reform 30 years before.
I support not only this bill, I support the way in which the government's carrying it out, and I do so because of my own experience as Home Secretary in 1968. We put up a bill of 20 clauses. 31 new clauses were added, 259 amendments were put down, several new schedules were tacked on. We staggered through, after 11 days, including morning sittings, we staggered through to clause 5. And I think we then threw in the towel.
By trying to do the whole package at once, by saying we will get rid of the hereditary peers and then do the long-term reform of the House, the short-term reform, getting rid of the hereditary peers, got bogged down because nobody could agree about the long-term. So what we said right from the start on this occasion was we get rid of the hereditary peers, we clear the ground, we get rid of that vested interest, the people who, while they're there, will always vote for nothing to change, and then we can have a sensible debate and sensible proposals and sensible action on the long-term solutions.
This argument about a two-stage reform is rubbish, and what it really shows, of course, is the reality, which is Blair was frightened of an independent House of Lords and he wanted to emasculate it with a nominated House. That's the truth.
The government believes that modernising the Constitution is vital to modernising our democracy. Legislating to stop hereditary peers being members of Parliament removes a profoundly undemocratic element. And it is my belief that the most thoughtful among the hereditary peers of all political persuasions know that the time has come to say thank you and goodbye.
I think one of the members today, the PRP, brought up how we counter the democracy argument. And I think members would really appreciate a good brief on that. And that's the core of it, really.
I think, Phil, we're going to have a presentation strategy on that, really.
Phil Bassett from the No. 10 Strategic Communications Unit is one of Jay's political strategy team of ministers, senior MPs and party officials. They want to keep public opinion on side over Lord's reform.
The bulk of those who signed that early day motion are really saying, tell me why it is that a directly elected second chamber isn't a good idea. That's what they're really saying. And we need to therefore spell out why it isn't. And then more importantly, in a sense, but building on it, you then say why the alternatives are better.
But I think you want to start with the positive picture, you know, saying that what we want from the second chamber is this, that and the other characteristics. Now, how do you achieve that? Not by having the democratic direct elections, which will simply replicate the Commons and not get the kind of second chamber that you want to fulfil these functions. And I mean, I think sort of starting from that positive end makes it much easier because you're not, as it were, put immediately on the defensive. Because, as you know, the question is always phrased in how can you, at the end of the 20th century, justify any House of Parliament which isn't at least mainly directly elected? So, you know, you've just got to turn, I think we've just got to turn that
I
round.
don't want to put that way, 'cause it's a good question.
Yes.
You know, it's a question of if we don't answer fully and properly, in whatever form the answer takes and whatever policy position is eventually reached, we will get into difficulty.
Well, I mean, Philip will have to write a good story.
Yeah.
Okay. There is a good story to tell them. We just need to tell it as strongly and forcefully as we can. It's fine.
Tory hereditaries are now turning against Margaret Jay. They dislike what they see as a bossy manner and a dismissive attitude towards them.
Some of them are pretty hopeless. They may not be pretty hopeless gardeners, they may not be pretty hopeless husbands or pretty hopeless huntsmen, but they're certainly pretty hopeless as parliamentarians and Democrats.
She said that we're not taking away their titles, they can always go back to their estates and their Labradors and their gin and tonics.
Ludicrous, completely ludicrous, and rather pathetic. This was them reinforcing stereotypes.
Everybody, in a sense, says, do we want to be the only country in the world that has a hereditary element in one of its chambers of parliament, except for Lesotho?
But behind the scenes, a new ultra-secret set of talks over the possibility of a deal had begun. They involved the Lord Chancellor Derry Irvine and Lord Cranborne.
He said that he believed that if we cleared the hereditaries out, all 750 or whatever the number was of them, he said that he believed that that would be the last that we would ever hear, or the country would ever hear, of House of Lords reform. That it just wouldn't take place, that stage 2 would not, in fact, happen. I assured him it would. We both treated one another as honourable people, and I believe that Robert Cranborne acted 100% honourably with me throughout.
I must say, in all my dealings with Derry, he's been completely straight. He has kept his word, kept quiet about what he said he kept quiet about, and I've never had any problem with him at all.
One of the most amazing parts of this story, Michael, and it must cause great frustration to the media, is that radio silence was maintained. It must have been the best kept secret for a very long time in British politics.
Before Tony Blair made him Lord Chancellor, Derry Irvine was a commercial lawyer, well used to cutting a deal. He decided to make Cranborne an offer. A few hereditary peers could be reprieved in exchange for Tory cooperation over the abolition bill.
Sure as eggs, Derry gets in touch and says, all right, what about 15 self-elected hereditaries in the transitional house? So I said, it's ridiculous. I'm not in the business of bargaining. Derry said, I'm not in the business of bargaining either. So I said, well, I'll tell you what I want is 100. It's the minimum I think I can get away with. And he laughed and he said, don't be so silly. So I said, well, fine. Battle of the Somme and Passchendaele will ruin your legislative programme next year, and the whole thing will be deeply embarrassing and ghastly.
He was describing the uncontrollable conduct of the hosts of backbench Tory hereditaries on his benches. He wasn't issuing a formal threat, he was just describing what he no doubt genuinely believed would have occurred, and my recollection is that he used the expression Somme and Passchendaele.
Both men had weapons of last resort they preferred not to use. Cranborne didn't want to draw further fire on the Tory peers by defying a popular Labour government, and Irvine knew that the government could bulldoze its legislation through, but it would cause chaos, so they both had an interest in reaching agreement.
Anyway, he rang me up, and he said, what about 50? This was some days later. So I said, well, I'm not in the business of bargaining. And I reported this to Haig, who was amused. He was the only one who knew about this at this stage. And by July, we'd got as far as 75. There was a certain rationale. It was 1 in 10, roughly, of the hereditary peers.
1 in 10 would mean 75. It was a formula. 1 in 10 didn't seem to be so unacceptable. The Labour Party is getting rid of 9/10 of the hereditary peers.
Cranborne now comes up with a new ploy to up the numbers. He suggests to Irvine that a further 15 hereditary peers who hold official positions in the House should also be reprieved.
I could hear Derry's sigh of relief, and he said, well, I'll ask the Prime Minister. And by return, I got done, which gets us up to 90. So I say, fine, well, it's not very elegant, and we're going to get into a certain amount of ridicule about all this, because it's obvious, just a sort of rather inelegant way of bridging a negotiating gap, which it was. I said, well, you will, of course, give me the Earl Marshal and the Lord Great Chamberlain. Done, he says.
So he got the figure up from 75 to 92, and good luck to him. He didn't get 100.
But Cranborne now ran into trouble with his own side when the Tory shadow cabinet vetoed the deal. But he wasn't to be put off. He was later to be called the Oscar Schindler of the hereditary peers, for without telling his own leader William Hague, he smuggled himself into number 10 to discuss the deal directly with Tony Blair.
Blair is a little late. He was very agreeable, offered me whiskey. We sat down in one of the sitting rooms upstairs. He suggested that it would be sensible to let this out sooner rather than later. At least one would have some sort of control over it, and I saw the force of that. We talked about the details of how that might be done. And he said, well, that all sounds perfectly possible, but I better ask Alistair to see whether he thinks this is all right. And so I said, well, I'd be perfectly happy to talk to Campbell.
Cranborne met Blair's press secretary Alistair Campbell to work out how best to make the deal public. He was still keeping William Hague in the dark.
I do think at that time Lord Cranborne had an awareness that he was skating on very, very thin ice. I think that it must be the case that he saw a real risk that he would be dismissed, because he did say that from one point of view, perhaps what he was doing was committing high treason.
Cranborne at last told Hague what he'd agreed with Tony Blair.
He was extremely upset. And I said, well, please don't raise it at Prime Minister's Question Time, which was his initial reaction. I must raise it. Because it'll make you look an awful fool. And Blair will make mincemeat of you. Anyway, he said, no, I must.
No good honourable members opposite shaking their heads. What they don't know is the Prime Minister does propose to keep hereditary peers in a Stage 1 reform of the House of Lords. Where does that leave his principles now?
Mr. Speaker, I take it from that he opposes the deal that has been agreed by the leader of the Conservative Party in the House of Lords. Now, Madam Speaker, as a result of this, we will indeed remove hereditary peers.
Hague tried another line of attack.
No deal has been made with the Conservative Party. What we know, Madam Speaker, is that the Prime Minister intends to turn the House of Lords into a house of cronies.
Well, Madam Speaker, look, I can't prevent the Right Honourable Gentleman engaging in what is a kamikaze mission on his side. All I can say to him is that even his cronies in the House of Lords agree with me that it's better to try and get...
Cranborne apologised to Hague for behaving like an ill-trained spaniel and leaving his leader to clear up the mess.
I said I'm extremely sorry that I behaved outrageously, but I'd do it again.
Did you offer your resignation at any point?
Yes, but he said he'd rather sack me. So I said I think in his place I'd have done the same.
Robert, sorry, So the Tory party was at such ludicrous 6s and 7s that the Labour Party thought, well, this is absolutely marvellous for us. This must be a very good deal for us. I believe that it was a very good deal for us, but the misjudgment, the political misjudgment of William Hague made it very much easier for us to demonstrate to the Labour Party that this really was a good deal for us. So William Hague played into our hands.
Cranborne's best political friend, Lord Strathclyde, was appointed leader by Hague after the whole Tory front bench had threatened to resign in protest at Cranborne's sacking.
Although we were told what Lord Strathclyde's understandings with William Hague were about, which were that, that he continued on the same basis that Lord Cranborne had, which of course made a complete nonsense of sacking Cranborne. But given that we were told that, we assumed his bona fides, but we didn't know that that was what he had actually agreed, because it seemed so extraordinary that William Hague should sign on to such a deal, say to somebody, you're fired because you've done this, but you can have the job. As long as you stick to the deal which I've just fired him for agreeing. But, we had to take that on trust a bit.
Jay had approached new players to take the Cranborne-Irvine deal forward. The former Common Speaker Lord Wetherell led the crossbench, or independent group of peers, the second largest in the Lords. Wetherell had been working on his own formula and now agreed to propose, in his own name, an amendment to the Abolition Bill that would reprieve the 92 hereditary peers.
So, Mr. Andre.
The stage is now set for peers to debate the bill, including the Wetherell Amendment. But although the original bill was unusually short, just 5 clauses, peers had tabled hundreds of new amendments, and Margaret Jay was unsure what weight to give to the changes proposed by each peer.
Lord Kinnoul, I don't know Kinnoul, who he...
He's a stoutish chap with grey hair.
Shortish,
So that's about 300.
You know him when I point him out.
Well, what I mean is he serious?
Oh, this is desperately serious.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, please, Margaret. He is serious. Yeah.
Well, who's going to make the argument again about the hereditary peers?
If I've done it once, can't I just sort of refer to what I've said before and then keep it very, very short?
But they won't have been there. They'll have been having a cup of tea when you said it before. But don't worry. I mean,
yeah.
We used to play it different ways, different days. Some days we would say, well, this is the day on which we say nothing. Icy restraint is the mood today. And other days we would say, well, this is clearly a day in which we have to be rather heavy. And other days we would take another tactic. It was really, honestly, dependent slightly on our mood of either irritation or resignation or whatever it might be as we rehearse the same arguments yet again.
Amendment proposed, page 1, line 5. Leave out the words as printed on the Marshall list.
My Lords, I shall attempt to reply to the Noble Lord's amendment with great animation in order not to invite the Noble Lord Earl Ferrers to suggest that I am either exhausted or bored with the proceedings of this House. I'm certainly not, and I would say to the Noble Lord that his amendment is in fact another valiant attempt to find a combination of circumstances in which hereditary peers may remain in your Lordship's House with certain rights. And I'm sure the committee will not be surprised to hear me say that it is frankly no more acceptable to the government than the others.
I don't like the way it's been done, where the hereditary peers have just been thrown out and nothing's been thought of in its place. I mean, it seems to me that it's been motivated by the African tom-toms, which is get rid of hereditary peers, get rid of hereditary peers.
The hereditary peers felt deeply hurt, deeply offended, not valued for what they were, as they saw it, the only truly independent members of the House. I mean, they have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, so it was very, very fraught.
What do you think of how your Leader of the Lords, Margaret Jay, has handled it?
Not very well.
You seem to pause for a long time.
I was thinking of the politest thing that I could say.
I think there's a certain mean streak in the Labour plan, the way that, you know, people being here for 50 years not going to be allowed to even walk into the House. I think there could be a little bit more generosity of spirit.
As a result of this, there's a good deal of ill will, and things have been said about hereditary peers by those members on the Labour front bench, which I think are both unnecessary and not particularly helpful.
I mean, when Margaret Jay herself has said that...
Well, she's almost a hereditary peer, really, isn't she?
In what way?
Well, I don't wish to be offensive, but I rather doubt whether she'd be here but for her father having been Prime Minister. I must go. Okay.
We've always thought that it was going to be a tremendous amount of fire and thunder and general drama all around the House of Lords, because obviously it's a major issue of self-interest for vast numbers of the members of it. To take last evening.
The Bill team discuss how to counter what they see as obstructive tactics deployed by hereditary peers, who are masters of parliamentary procedure.
And now people are getting fed up. They feel insulted by the fact that they're filibustering, quite obviously, and I think if we've answered them, and that's all there is to it.
As the thing goes on, I'm sure that our replies should get shorter and shorter if we've already dealt in detail with precisely the same point. I think we've got
it's the only way to answer what is an exercise in repetition.
Yeah.
We need to have laid the
I was
ground.
very fortunate that these 3 absolutely top-class lawyers were assigned, as it were, in ministerial terms to this bill, because that gave us firepower, which was more than adequate, frankly, to knock down most of the things which were dreamt up by the hereditary peers.
The way the opposition went in the bill, unlike any other bill I'd ever seen, was it became an incredibly sort of intense legal debate with frankly mad legal propositions being advanced. But when I was a barrister, whenever you didn't really know what you were talking about, you focused very much on the procedure rather than the substance.
Well, you discussed time.
Exactly.
And did you ever feel sort of out of it a bit, because here were these three top-class lawyers, and you're not a lawyer?
No, I was the plain, blunt woman.
And Lord Norrie has put down some amendments raising his points.
Jay's bill team includes Tony Blair's first employer, Lord Irvine, and his former flatmate, Lord Falconer. The argument that hereditaries use against certain life peers, especially life peers like yourself, is that you are an appointee of the Prime Minister, and that they say that you are a prime example of one of Tony's cronies.
For all of us in the House, we can be judged on our merits, can't we? I can be judged as either good or bad in relation to what I do in the House of Lords, but just as they can. And people like myself, Gus MacDonald, Jerry Irvine, the sorts of people you have in mind, I'd have thought people would be able to form a view as to whether or not what we'd done in the past had justified appointment to the House of Lords.
I've never believed that there was any greater merit in being appointed here because you are the Prime Minister's best friend, or you work in his chambers, or you are his tennis partner, or his past flatmate, or something like that, than being an accident of birth like myself.
Well, one or two actually had a couple of...
The bill team discuss how to deal with the latest amendment from Earl Ferrers, who's raised a small but scholarly point.
And then?
Group 20, that again is one of Ferrers's, make the same change everywhere the word occurs, and it is to delete the word A when it appears before hereditary and replace it by the word an.
Well, that's quite correct.
What is party policy?
Despite the fact that he was not educated at a state school, he is right in that.
I have got a great deal of sympathy with that proposition, and I do not really quite understand why the parliamentary draftsman is so hostile to it.
Why is the parliamentary...
Are you an Anne or an A?
I'm an Anne. I'm an Anne. I was brought up to say Anne Hotel.
Well, then you should drop the H. An hereditary or a hereditary.
An hereditary.
If you're a Cockney, it's Anne. You should drop the H.
I agree.
Well, I want to know why Christopher, the parliamentary draftsman, doesn't agree.
Precedents apparently are in favour, aren't they?
But they're bad precedents.
Precedents in favour of
Yes, without the N.
The only thing is that when I saw Christopher yesterday, he said to me, slightly worried, Tony, not accepting any of these amendments. I think the whole bill may fall apart.
Well, I'm a hereditary peer, but apparently Earl Ferrers thinks he's an hereditary peer. The Ferrers is a very ancient Norman family, and maybe he's thinking in French, I don't know.
For instance, an historian, an hotel, an hysterical scene, an hereditary title, an habitual offender. My lords, that comes from Fowler's modern English usage. My lords, I defy even the government to beat that, and I suggest that that is a more appropriate word to use rather than A. I beg to move.
An was formerly usual before an unaccented syllable beginning with H, and is still often seen and heard. An historian, an hereditary title. I read on. But now that the H in such words is pronounced, the distinction has become anomalous. I think we ought to stick to A on this occasion. But I think it's something we probably ought to return to report in third reading.
The government has appointed a royal commission to recommend what a fully reformed House of Lords should look like. It's headed by the former Tory Chief Whip, Lord Wakeham. Margaret Jay can now answer critics who ask what will happen after the abolition of the hereditaries with the mantra, "We're waiting for Wakeham." The Commission takes evidence from the public at hearings across the country.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I welcome you to the Royal Commission's public hearing here in Newcastle.
I feel that this need for a reform of the House of Lords is very ill-conceived, and I think the House of Commons itself should put itself in order before they even start thinking of the House of Lords.
Back in Westminster, Jay's team has an arcane new amendment to consider. There are two senior hereditary positions due to be reprieved in the bill, the Earl Marshal and the Lord Great Chamberlain. But should the words "of England" be added to their titles?
The one thing I wanted to take your view on is the one against which officials of mark consider. That's Group 14, Clause 2. Now, in fact, the Earl Marshal and the Lord Great Chamberlain are of England. So we could add the words "of England" to the bill without losing anything. There are presently no holders of the Scottish offices. The offices have not been abolished. They could be revived. It's probably pure theory that they would be. If they were revived, then you could have, in theory, confusion. And apparently the Duke of whoever he is has got Lord Lion, King of Arms of Scotland, on his side about this. But quite honestly, the amount of my life that I'm willing to devote to this question is severely limited. And I rather think we should just give it to them. And it's a dead easy thing to give. Why not give it?
Well, I mean, my only worry about it is I don't care tuppence, frankly, but my only worry is that if we appear to give away things about which we don't care tuppence, we shall find ourselves giving away things which are actually quite significant, just because we are uninterested in them. And I mean, I'm sure we won't in practice, but you know what I mean. If we make the argument amongst ourselves that really what on earth does it matter, all of these issues on which they think an enormous importance and significance attaches will be revived.
More dignifying. Well, I mean, I see the force of that too. Let me tell you, this I think is possibly my last word on this subject. The Duke of Montrose must this morning have rung my office about a dozen times to find out what our attitude to this is. Now, I quite honestly am willing to agree or to resist. As I say, and in the name of consistency, we can resist, and in the name of not encouraging a misplaced faith in a lot of their other balls-aching points.
Start them off, you know what they are. All right. Well, I think we should approach it with an open mind and resist it.
Right, so many times. We have been so patient. We have sat there for hour after hour. We have dealt with every amendment with courtesy, with calm, with attention to detail. But there really does come a point when you begin to feel that it is simply self-indulgence.
I wondered whether she had the same interest in the mechanics of constitutional change rather than just the brutal politics of it. I've come to the conclusion that what she's really interested in is the brutal politics of it.
But to temper the brutal politics, Lady Jay and Lord Strathclyde would meet in less confrontational surroundings, following the civilised traditions of their predecessors. How much do you see Margaret Jay for lunch?
Well, every now and again we have lunch, which is
where?
Long-term tradition. Well, she takes me to Shepherd's, and I take her to the Grand Paradiso.
And when's your next lunch?
Next week.
The summer recess is approaching, and on the agenda for lunch between the two leaders is the bill's very slow progress, and the problems each leader is having with their own supporters. Later, Jay discusses whether there's anything she might offer Strathclyde to help him with his Tory peers, without alienating her own side.
There is a sense in which Strathclyde would like another kind of piece of a victory, in quotes, to take back to the Commons. And we haven't had that follow-up meeting with him to address that.
I've always felt that, as they said, it's a bad bill and this and that and the other, that they would need for their own purposes to have a couple of defeats, or some defeats at report, or perhaps their reading or whatever, to show that they were trying.
You know, what we've got to think about is our own backbenchers getting very grumpy because they are quite tense about this, that we've given a lot in Weatherall, there's no more to give, that's the deal, and are we really going to go on, extend into one of these extended exchanges, because they'll get pretty cross about it.
We're in danger of having to sit a long way into August, which will create complications even with our own people. And they're aware of this. But let's not get too excited yet.
And when you say let's get too excited about it yet, I agree with you. We certainly don't need to get sort of panicked about it. That's the last thing we need to do. But we do need to come to some decisions, because there's no point in us simply being defeated on report on amendments next week, which we could, if we were to do things around the edges, not necessarily agree to amendments, but, you know, take other positions which might meet their concerns, be able to extract something from them.
Well, that was the way I was thinking from the beginning.
But, I mean, I think the overall perspective is that we don't need politically to give any more.
As Jay and her fellow ministers in the Lords pose for their end of summer session photograph, her abolition bill is still on schedule.
Can we try a smile now, just a little bit more? Big smile for this one, that's lovely. Thank you very much.
But she knows that the hardest part is still to come. It's autumn, and as Lord Strathclyde returns to the fray, there are still many uncertainties surrounding the bill. Two of his peers have mounted complex legal challenges, claiming that the whole bill was unconstitutional and should be thrown out. And Strathclyde has warned Margaret Jay that there's still a chance that a combination of Tory and crossbench, hereditary and life peers might defeat the bill.
I think Margaret Jay knows enough about the way the House works that there is a real possibility that enough people would think that this is the wrong thing to do. Because the other thing I said to her is that under no circumstances would I or anybody else on the Conservative Party vote for this bill.
After he learns the result of the two challenges to the bill, Strathclyde goes to address his front bench troops.
I apologise for being late. This week, the two legal challenges that we had brought to the Privileges Committee failed, but I don't think we should be overly despondent about that. We did the right thing bringing them forward. There was clearly a doubt at the very heart of the legislation, and the government should be extremely grateful that we have clarified that doubt.
Under the terms of the bill, the hereditary peers will now be able to vote for which of their fellow hereditaries they wish to preserve. It'll be a new experience, as peers along with lunatics and criminals don't have a vote.
Whether or not this bill gets to royal assent, we still have a process to get through, and those of you who are hereditary peers here must register by 7 o'clock this evening. If you have not registered either to vote or to be a candidate, you will lose that right forever. So it's very serious.
It's been decided by the House of Lords authorities that hereditaries standing as candidates should each submit an election address of no more than 75 words. And then, did you write your 75 words?
No.
You didn't write 75 words? How many words did you write?
None.
None at all?
I thought that was rather vulgar and totally unnecessary.
Strathclyde knows if the bill is now voted down, the government will use its powers to throw out all the hereditaries. He decides the Tory peers should abstain.
I spent a long time, many weeks and months, thinking about today and our approach. And I have toyed with Plan B, that we should throw it out. But I think this is the right decision. But there are very vocal opponents to this. They think that we should throw the bill out and take the consequences, whatever they may be. And they come at it for a variety of reasons.
Before you came in, Charlie, Dennis was saying that it is his view that they won't oppose the third reading motion.
Right.
If there was any attempt to oppose the question when it's put at 3:50, the Tories will vote with us.
Right.
I have that from Tom Strathclyde in order to ensure that these amendments are all discussed.
Right, yeah.
And the big vote will be on this bill to now pass, which we'll come to when we get
And
to
will there be a vote on that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd be amazed if there isn't. There are hundreds of them here today planning their strategy.
Really?
The Tories are uncertain about how many hereditaries will join the so-called last ditchers and go down fighting. The final debate will require careful coordination between the two front benches.
I am utterly convinced. You want to speak to Dennis Carter and say that I think that Margaret ought to pop up and give her 5-minute speech as to why the bill shouldn't pass. I will immediately then make my contribution, which will explain why we are abstaining on this, but also explaining why it is such a terrible bill. And then that will set the tone of the debate.
If you speak first, and then Tommy, and then Bill, and then the headbangers will all get up on the back benches, we'll have nobody replying to it.
Well, Thomas and I were talking about this earlier, and I think, Dennis, you need to negotiate that.
But we'll need we'll need a minister to say something at the end. That
Yes.
shows it's the end of it.
Yes.
Otherwise, the back benches will open-ended.
It should be me, right.
All right?
Yeah.
I'll sort that out with Tom.
Okay. Then I will stand and I'll tell you what I'm going to say. I'm going to say this is a disgraceful bill, quite appalling, blah, blah, blah. But
it should go through.
It should go through. I'm going to abstain. You all going to abstain. And then that will set the tone.
Having been a little rough about some of the hereditary peers, I would certainly give credit to Thomas Strathclyde for the way in which he held his troops together, which was extremely difficult.
Are you in control of your own peers?
I think as the scaffold has been built outside the House of Lords, the guillotine has been sharpened, the Labour Party tricoteurs are gathering. I think increasingly that has concentrated the minds of a great deal of peers, backbench peers in the House of Lords, hereditary peers who are about to be booted out. And inevitably, an element of control disappears. And of course, there's always been a long tradition in the House of Lords that peers don't do what the party whips want them to do.
Third reading of the House of Lords Bill, the Baroness J. of Paddington.
The Earl of Beaufort, a direct descendant of Nell Gwyn and Charles II, is making a final stand against the loss of his birthright.
If you look at Margaret's face as she realises what is going on, I think there is perhaps fear is the wrong word, but a real feeling of what on earth is happening here. This is going into chaos and confusion, and this is out of control, out of our control.
We'd been forewarned that things were likely to happen. I don't think I was surprised. I mean, I may have been surprised that it happened at that particular moment, but there were all kinds of rumours circulating. I mean, foxes were going to be let loose in the chamber. People were going to turn up with hunting horns, you know. There were going to be this and that sort of demonstration. But I mean, it was rather clear that anything of this kind would simply boomerang on those people who were supposedly making what they saw as a forceful political point.
My lords, like so many noble lords crowded anxiously here tonight, I honour those on all sides, people who I am proud to claim as friends, soon who will be driven from us by this bill. A long chapter of history is being closed tonight. But, my lords, the tale is now told. The past is done. The glass is shattered, and it cannot be remade. The Prime Minister has taken a knife and scored a giant gash across the face of history. But the past is no longer the point.
Question is that this bill now pass. As many as that been say content? Contrary not content? Clear about.
The abolition bill was passed on its third reading by a majority of 140, with most hereditaries following Lord Strathclyde's lead and abstaining. As the bill went back to the Commons, the hereditaries held their own election. 1/10 of the 750 hereditaries would survive. It was an elaborately complex voting procedure.
Good morning. You should vote using the numbers 1 to 42 next to a vote candidate.
Okay.
The Tories, as the largest party, had to select 42 of their candidates and place them in their exact order of preference. The crossbench and Labour hereditaries had to go through the same procedures with their proportionately fewer candidates.
It's like taking an exam.
For those new to voting, it had been a challenging initiation.
I think it's the first piece of democracy in the House of Lords for a very long time.
The Tories waited nervously to find out how popular they really were with their colleagues. When the results came, Earl Ferrers was top of the Tory poll, ahead of his young leader, Lord Strathclyde. And in a surprise twist, Lord Cranborne, who'd unexpectedly withdrawn from the ballot, was one of 7 former leaders of the Lords to receive a life peerage from Tony Blair.
Anyway, Cranborne has been rewarded by a life peerage. The Cecils always end up on top.
In the final Commons debate on the bill, Tony Benn, who'd long ago renounced his own hereditary peerage, offered his analysis of what Lady J had achieved.
This is a total breach of the election manifesto upon which we were elected. I have to say that, because there was no provision for it, whatever, that we would not only allow hereditary peers to remain, but allow them to elect each other in perpetuity. And I think that parties should take their manifesto seriously, particularly as we had an overwhelming majority and by now could have had what I would like to have seen, a wholly elected second chamber.
You didn't actually deliver on your manifesto commitment. 100 hereditary peers have remained.
But that is self-evident. We did not deliver on our manifesto commitment. We delivered 9/10 of our manifesto commitment, with the whole of our legislative programme unscathed, and was it added to by further useful legislation. And, you know, the thing about deals, Michael, is that they never give complete satisfaction to everyone. In fact, the nature of a good deal probably is, almost by definition, that it doesn't give complete satisfaction to both sides.
Now it really was the end of the peer show. Hereditary peers arrived for the last day that any of them could attend in the Lords by right of birth. The end of an 800-year tradition was in sight.
My Lords, my earlier words, for which some said were a little brusque at third reading, were to say thank you and goodbye. Let me say this afternoon that gratitude was sincere, genuinely meant, and properly merited. And the friendly goodbyes we offer are also simply meant. We wish you all very well.
I don't think that Margaret wrote those words herself. I think she had to get somebody else to do it, and I think she said it slightly in gritted teeth, and I don't think anybody believed that she meant what she said. But the fact that she did say it, I think, meant that she had learnt a valuable lesson of the process of this, and I suppose we should all be grateful for that.
Do you think you've learned something that you might have handled and done in a different way in getting this bill through?
No, because I think all of the things that some members of the Tory party say, oh, if they'd been nicer about it, if they'd been more charming, if they'd been this, that and the other, are complete nonsense. They were determined, those people who were determined to oppose this bill, to oppose it, they just weren't sufficiently well organised to achieve any major victories. And the people who were making the political decisions in the front of the Tory party were sufficiently politically sophisticated and sufficiently politically in touch to know how far and how little they could go with their own backbenchers and with the wider Conservative Party and with us.
It was time for the hereditaries who were going to pack their bags. The Tory hereditary Lord Roe-Allen had failed to be elected to stay on.
I was devastated, frankly. I've given an awful lot of my life to this place. I was very, very disappointed that I didn't make it back. We've just got to get on with it, though. People are made redundant every day in this life, and we've just got to look upon this as being made redundant.
When it actually comes to it, it's very painful. I've had a letter from the Black Rod. I got a hand in my pass that we got to empty out our lockers, you know, by the end of the week, empty our desks out. Our mail is only being forwarded on for 3 or 4 months. It's quite a shock.
What was that last day like for you?
I don't think it was the feeling of the last day at school. I think it was more the feeling on death row. When you're saying goodbye to a colleague and they're going up to the scaffold, I think it was much more that. It was not a day I would ever wish to see repeated or be a part of again.
In another part of the Lords, Lady J is holding the traditional party to celebrate the passage of a bill and to thank her civil servants.
It has been a real pleasure to be able to rely on all of you and to work with all of you, because we have felt that we are dealing with the classical British civil service Rolls-Royce machine at its best, and it really has been. And it has been an outstanding, if I may say so, working relationship between us all. And I know that, as I say, Gareth and Derry and Dennis join me very much in thanking you from the Minister's point of view, and on to Wakeham, as they say.
Lord Wakeham's report on the future of the House of Lords is finally completed. Bound in special ribbons, the first 2 copies are ready for delivery to the Queen. The Royal Commission recommends a mainly appointed House with an elected element and no hereditaries. The power of patronage should be taken away from the Prime Minister and given to an independent appointments commission. Margaret J. promises to give the report proper consideration and says she hopes it might provide a basis for the next stage of reform. But the Tories suspect that Tony Blair wants to lose Wakeham in a Whitehall pigeonhole. They feel he's now very happy with the patronage he can exercise in a House of Lords that he's largely stripped of its hereditary element.
Tony Blair wants a nominated House.
How do you know that?
Because he told me.
He told you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Tony Blair told you that he wanted an all-nominated House of Lords?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's no doubt about that.
The Conservatives have always said that what the Prime Minister wants is what they call a House of Tony's cronies.
Yes, well, the Prime Minister emphatically does not want a House of Tony's cronies, and this is the first Prime Minister this century who has indicated absolutely clearly that he goes along with a significant diminution in the traditional powers of the Prime Minister in relation to a fully reformed House.
Margaret J. holds a farewell party for the small band of Labour's 19 hereditary peers. They're the first turkeys in history known to have voted for Christmas, and there's a strong sense of guilt among the few who've survived the cull.
You sad for the colleagues who will be leaving?
Yes, I feel very much as if I've been on an aeroplane or a train that's had a major disaster, and I'm a survivor, and I'm feeling a bit guilty about it, as survivors do.
Let me speak on behalf of the corpses. Let me speak on behalf of the corpses. We're very glad that someone as good as you has survived.
Well,
it could have been worse.
The only thing that's good about having a continuation of a hereditary peerage, rather than accepting a life peerage should it have been offered, is that one is more of a free agent. A free spirit, if you like.
That's what has been used by the hereditary peers as the argument for the existence of the House of Lords in its present form, that the hereditaries are a much freer agent than those appointed by a Prime Minister.
We've been through all that many times, but the thing is that what comes afterwards need not necessarily be party political.
A chapter of British history was ending with the finger food that Margaret J. had bought herself that morning from Marks and Spencer. The whole abolition process had been a case study in the problems of moving from the easy certainties of opposition into the reality of government.
The other side would have liked a lot more than 100 hereditaries to stay. We would have liked many fewer. But against a century of failure to reform the hereditary peerage, I claim a huge success in having 9/10 go in legislative peace.
We will miss you very much indeed, those of you who are going. We know we will all meet again and value each other's contributions and our joint endeavours on behalf of changing this country. And those of us who are here will accept your inheritance with great sense of carrying on a very dignified and a very splendid tradition. We thank you all very much and know that you're going to make an enormous contribution in the future. So thank you.
But the last word was claimed by Labour's oldest hereditary peer.
So sorry, Frank.
May I say one thing, and if I'm executed on the spot for saying it, I hope that all the hereditary Labour peers will eventually, in one way or another, reappear. I hope that we're told they're going to have a lot of life peers made. Well, the first choice, first priority should fall on the existing hereditary Labour peers who made such a great contribution. Otherwise, it's all humbug.